Welcome to Worth Your Time with your hosts from the nationally syndicated Bob and Tom Show, Kristi Lee, and the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Zoo, Dr. Rob Shumaker. Our mission to inform, entertain, and educate with guests from all aspects of life. We guarantee there isn't another podcast that features two hosts with such different backgrounds and discussions with remarkable people doing exceptional things. So let's get started. Here are your hosts, Kristi Lee and Dr. Rob Shumaker.
Kristi Lee, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Rob. How are you doing?
I am really good. And you?
I'm great because this is one of the most exciting guests we've had on the podcast.
This is an incredible guest.
I know.
That I still am pinching myself.
Me too.
That she agreed to do it. And Mel Raines. And I learned today.
You're not going to do this. You're going to give her a real name out?
I am. I'm going to do it. It's in the public.
It's not I'm not in hiding about it. Just people don't call me that. But.
I've known her for years. She's a tremendous colleague, wonderful friend, one of the kindest, nicest, best people that I know. And her real name is Michelle. I found out that today when she called me and it popped up on my phone as Michelle Raines. Actually, Mel Raines, the CEO of Pacers Sports and Entertainment.
Yes.
We are super excited to have you today. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, man. There's so much to talk about today. What I don't want to do is start with where everything is today with Indiana Pacers, Indiana Fever,
Caitlin Clark,
basketball,
WNBA, all
WNBA,
of that.
super interesting
topics. We're going to keep you in suspense and make you wait.
We're going to save that for later in the conversation.
Yes, we are.
But I know a little bit about Mel from knowing you for a few years and having some friends and colleagues in common. You have the most interesting career journey that I think imaginable. I don't think anybody would have predicted where you would be today from where you started. That's pretty fair.
I think that's fair, including myself. I think that's fair. Yeah. And my family and all my friends. Yeah.
And you started in politics.
I did.
Which
on
you
accident.
don't think of politics and basketball. Some people do, but...
How did you start in politics by accident? That seems like something you'd have to be so directed to.
I think the title of my book should be The Accidental Career, maybe, when I'm done with all of it. But
I like that.
I was a telecom advertising major at IU, and I did an internship in London between my junior and senior year, which was a phenomenal experience. I loved living in a big city and went back to Bloomington, and I thought, I'm just too big for this city now. I have to spread my wings. It's so silly. I should have spent my whole senior year there. But regardless, I applied for an internship in DC. I knew it was a city. It wasn't in my area of study, but I wanted to get out of Bloomington and do something bigger. And so I got an internship there at the National Association of Broadcasters on the SPIA program. And I fell in love with DC. It was just such a fun city when you're 20, 21.
And what year was that?
1991. I actually moved to DC on the first day of the Persian Gulf War in 1991.
Unrelated.
Totally unrelated, thank goodness. Yeah, I just remember watching it. We all watched it on CNN. That was the only thing, I think that was 24-hour news at the time, to date myself. But yeah, and so I fell in love with DC. I never took a poli-sci class. I graduated and applied for an internship on the Hill and Capitol Hill, and the rest, as they say, became history.
So what I think you might not know, which I didn't realize literally until you just said it, is I was living there at the same time.
You were at the National Zoo, weren't you?
Yeah, I was at the National Zoo. So I absolutely was living there while you lived there, and we may have passed each other on the street. Who knows?
Probably did.
Who knows?
Yeah, played softball on the mall against each other. Any number of things could happen.
If you saw the last person they picked to be on the softball team, that would have been me. So that guy standing there waiting, that was me.
You were on the team, yeah.
So how did you merge into politics from the internship? It was a broadcast internship?
It was, it was in broadcasting.
Okay.
My roommate on the program from IU, who's lives here now, and she met her husband on the program. We're all dear friends. She was interning for Senator Lugar. So I had and there were several on the program who were in House members, Lee Hamilton's office and others. Sure. And so it just gave me a glimpse into what that was like from a distance. And they all loved it. And from my roommate.
Wow.
She loved it. And she wound up staying out there also and working for a member of Congress on the House side. And so I thought, everybody works for Senator Lugar, so I'll apply for an internship with Dan Coates. the other senator, and was lucky enough to get the internship, because I would love to see that application. It probably was appalling. I had never taken it. I really didn't know what I was doing, other than I thought my parents were probably Republican and he seemed like a great guy, and I applied. I was very naive.
And what did your duties include at that time?
So very important, opening mail. I had a lot of paper cuts that summer. There were no email existed
There's
then.
a lot of paper, right?
Yep, answering the phone. I was very good at talking on the phone.
Desk phone, of course.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like a switchboard. Yeah.
And you had to
Oh,
write
wow.
messages, right?
I had to write messages, write down what constituent was calling about bills, for, against, and write down their address so we could send them a letter, that sort of thing. It was very basic stuff. Capitol tours. I'm an excellent tour guide. And now when I do tours at the field house, Cambridge Field House, or during construction, people were like, "You're really good at this." And I was like, "I started out giving tours. I know how to give a good tour. Only I used to make up the dates of the Capitol, but now I actually know all the real facts in the field house. It's a better tour now. But I got caught once. I gave a Notre Dame history professor, a tour of his family. And I literally just used to make dates up all the time. I was like, in 1837, like something happened. I have no idea. And this guy was like, "What?" And I was like, in the 1900s. Like the whole thing was very sketchy. But yeah, that was my very first job. And somebody at a lower level got moved back to Indy for a job here. And so I took their job on the phones. Truly the low level staff assistant job on Capitol Hill, making $17,000 a year. Living in a group house, the whole thing. Like I started at the bottom of the ladder.
I don't know. I guess I do know why. It sounds so comforting to hear you say that was the job you had, because I think that's what everybody imagines. That's what you do when you start as an intern. And things have changed so much.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of interns in politics and staffing and so on.
Totally.
And things being virtual, and it just sounds so reassuring to think about those processes. It must have been really rewarding in that way.
It was a real glimpse into something I did. Like I said, I didn't study it, but you would sit in the front office and people would come in for spring break or tours or lobbyists, or your predecessor
possible.
might have come in for issues that were before the zoo. And where are you from is the first question. And I grew up in South Bend, and you make those connections. And sometimes they would know someone who knew someone that you knew, or went to IU. And it was really important to Senator Coates that he had Hoosiers working in that office. And so your first touch point was that. And I realized how important that was. And later on in my career, I was back on Capitol Hill, and that stuck. Those things are important, to not just hire someone from New York to work in your front office. But I loved it. And many things about it. But my third month on the job was the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing. And so you can imagine, before email, and it's unfolding really quickly in real time. So the phones in the Senate just went down. We were just overloaded with calls. It was a nonstop barrage from morning till evening. Every time you got done with one person, the next call was waiting. And people were
a very controversial nominee for some.
And it was a very
allegations,
controversial time when the allegations came up.
Allegations
Nobody
of
heard of anything
sexual
like
misconduct.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And people were very passionate. So you get a tax bill is up and people call and say, "Vote against Senate 1, 2, 3, 4." And it's not quite passionate. This was something people were really passionate about. They might have been a man who was falsely accused of something at work, or a woman who had gone through some harassment in her career. And they were really emotional calls. And to be 22, just inundated for days upon days, 10 hours a day, was really eye-opening about how important that was. Justice Thomas is 30 plus years later still on the Supreme Court. That was an incredibly important vote. And up until then, it had been fairly nonpartisan. Like the vetting process was more about your legal knowledge. If you think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg was confirmed 98-2.
Wow.
It was a
I didn't know that either.
different time.
Yeah,
definitely. I think I've got that right. It was, if it's not that, it was pretty darn close. So
You do make up.
You do make up dates?
I do dates more than votes, but it was really.
Do you remember the date Ginsburg was confirmed? You can make it up.
I don't. I want to say 80. I want to say 89, but I'm probably wrong.
That's close.
Could be.
We're not going to
Could be.
check you,
Yeah.
I promise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, it was a great first job.
And then you went from there.
So I was there for 4.5 years, and I was not big on legislation, which if you're on Capitol Hill is pretty much constricting for your career, I would say. If you're not a big legislative person, I'm a little more operational, political. So I applied to work on the Republican convention, which was in San Diego. I think because I thought it would be great to live in San Diego.
Sure.
And I moved there, and Senator Coates was very supportive and helped me get the job.
Now,
I moved.
Who do you apply to work on the Republican or Democratic convention?
They named a convention manager, head of the convention, and they set up, it's like a sub arm of the Republican National Committee. So it's called the Committee on Arrangements for the Republican National Convention. And technically that's what the organization's called. So they have a head of that, and I applied through him basically. And I think I applied for 4 jobs. I think I interviewed for 4 jobs before I finally got one. So I was clearly not knocking anybody's socks off in my interview process.
But you were persistent.
Eventually I got it. Yeah. And I was an assistant to the head of the platform committee, which was great.
And so what does that mean? I have no idea what that
I answered
entails.
phones a lot. I scheduled a lot. The process of writing the platform is really interesting. There's a group of professional staff people at the time. I don't know how they do it anymore, but that work on Capitol Hill and issue areas and would really draft the platform. And there's a committee, 2 people from every state that are elected out of the Republican National Committee to approve the platform. And that sort of has to happen as part of the inner workings of a convention. I think the show that you see on TV, which is very important for each party, what people don't understand is that there are things that happen that you can't be the nominee if you don't do during that week. You're legally being nominated to represent your party on the ballot in all 50 states. And so there are pieces of business that have to take place for that to happen, and passing a platform is one of those things. The rules of the party is another. And the roll call where they say, like, the great state of Indiana,
right.
That's part of the process by what you have to do those things in order to become the nominee on the ballot. And so the platform is one of those.
And then you still have to stage this huge event with all these people and delegates, and being on the event side of a lot of events. I know that had to have been obviously something that sparked you, because now you have done so many wonderful events, and we'll get to that in the second half of the podcast. Yeah. But was that part of that? Was it like you looked around and you went, I want to do this?
I totally caught the fever. You're exactly right, Kristi.
Did you catch that? She caught the fever.
I did. The big event fever in that case, which is back in my life now. And I think it was, and I've thought a lot about it. I was 20, maybe 26 at the time. You get so much more responsibility at an event like that than you would in a normal job, because everything has to be done by a certain date, and there's never enough time. There's always more things that people want to do. And so you really get handed a lot of opportunity. And if you worked at Eli Lilly or Cummins or something like that, the kinds of things you end up doing on a convention, they would never have you do in that. It's probably similar to the major events you do every year.
Mm-hmm. So what was the time frame from when you started until the convention was over? And then does your job end at the end of the convention?
It does. It does. I was telling someone this today. I think I've probably started more jobs where I knew my last day on my first day than not. That's politics
so
in a nutshell. That's what it is. So I started in January. I was in an early wave of hires at the time and went through August.
Wow, so half a year.
Yeah, and it's dog years. You're working long days. And again, in 1996, it's so funny when I think back about it. There was no technology. Think about the podium that you see at a convention and the main speaker there. Today, when you're doing the podium drawing and you're doing this, what you want it to be, it would be a PDF. You would send it back to DC, to headquarters. You'd have a call the next day. You'd look at it. You'd make tweaks. We had to take giant architectural drawings, put it in a big FedEx tube, have it to FedEx by 6:45 San Diego time to get it for 8 a.m. arrival to have that call. Wow. And we would never make the office time. So we would flag down. We knew the guy's route. This was on Bayshore Drive. We would flag the FedEx guy down and throw the tubes in like twice a week. He knew we were coming every time. It was sort of those things that I really think I enjoyed the challenge of figuring those things out. Things today that are so easy were so much harder then.
We should probably say you're a young woman. This was not a long time ago.
No.
Well, 1996
so it's just how
the world, yeah.
It's just how fast technology
exactly,
is.
Exactly. And how much easier it is. We had a guy that used to stand, my desk was by the copier, like the SNL skit, making copies.
You have to say it right.
Yeah, making copies. And the guy, and the poor kid who did the press clips all day long was standing there cutting out articles and photocopying them, doing a big stack of these. We killed so many trees with clips. And now every day I get each of the teams sends out their separate clips, and it's an easy, just hit send and click a link and read it, and no trees are dying, and it's amazing. Yeah.
It is.
Okay, so you were responsible for the presidential election.
Well, we didn't do very well.
Not that year.
Yeah, Bob Dole never became president, but worked on that. And then I thought I would go be a regular person out of politics and find a real job. I was terrible at that for 3 or 4 months, and then had an opportunity to go to the RNC, Republican National Committee, in January of 97. Jim Nicholson was elected on the 5th ballot. Not an overwhelming choice, but ended up being a fantastic chairman. And he was a home builder in Colorado. He had no people. So 2 of my friends had run his campaign and called and said, if you can get here, this was maybe Saturday, if you can get here Monday, you've got a job. And I packed up my car in Indiana and went back to DC and started working for him. And actually, they completely lied to me. He didn't know anything about it. Jim didn't know anything about it. I got there. He interviewed me. He didn't understand why he would need a secretary and a scheduler. He had a traditional secretary running his business, and he grilled me. He was a West Point grad. He was tough. He is tough. He's still alive. And I came out of there and I was like, if I don't get this job, you guys made me pack up my life and drive here in a day. And I did get the job, and it worked out just fine. But yeah, I was really nervous at the end of that interview.
Wow.
I want to jump ahead to working with Dick Cheney, Vice President Dick Cheney.
So interesting.
So interesting to me. And you were young at the time then.
How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Like we were talking about before, right? DC's a small town. You've been there.
It is.
Everybody
really
knows everybody else. Senator Coates, chief of staff, for most of the time I was there, was Dick Cheney's best friend from high school, who had been his chief of staff in the House and at the Pentagon, worked with him in the Pentagon. And his name was Dave Gribbin. And so I had lots of friends who worked in the administration, many in the White House. And when this opportunity...
So when you say friends, do you mean... Now, this is... When I was living there, I knew a lot of people, and I'm making an assumption. I want to check it. You mean friends like people you used to hang out with, go to bars with, hang out in your off time, not friends at work.
Correct.
Just people you knew socially. Oh, yeah, you work with so-and-so. You work at the White House, yeah.
I had worked on the 2000 Republican convention. So a lot of my former colleagues went into the administration right away. And I didn't go in until 2006. So some of my best friends in the world were working in the White House or in different agencies. People that I went out with every weekend, vacation with, hung out with, true friends.
Yeah.
One of them was the White House political director for the president. One was... I don't even know what you would call her title in the real world, but like a COO of the West Wing, like operationally making it work. Think of advanced travel, coordination, all those pieces. Vice President Cheney had this opening and they were looking for candidates. And the 2 of them floated my name, I'm sure amongst others. And I did the thing you should never do. So they called. I was working at the time. I was in Philip Morris Government Affairs. We had Miller Brewing, Kraft, Nabisco, Philip Morris. Great job. Getting my grad degree at Georgetown for free. Making a very good living. Pretty much working normal hours, some travel, but good job. So I got a call. Would you like to interview to come be the assistant to the vice president for political affairs? And I immediately said, I'm incredibly flattered, but I have no interest in that. Thank you. And I had gotten calls about other administration jobs over the years, and I really hadn't been interested in them. And I liked what I was doing and had a good path to leadership at that company. But you should take the call about the White House one. Maybe not OMB or something. Like, don't take that call, but take this call. But it was a Friday afternoon. I remember I was sick. Like, the whole thing is very vivid in my head. It was a terrible time. I was taking finals for the first time in years. I was renovating my kitchen. My house was torn to bits, and I think I had bronchitis. And I thought, go sell crazy someplace else because I'm all full up. I'm not going to the White House, right?
Can we pause for a second? I think that's the greatest story I've ever heard. That essentially the Vice President of the United States called you and you said, yeah, I'm not interested. Thank you.
I'm not really. Yeah,
Yeah.
I played hard to get pretty well. Yeah.
I have bronchitis.
Yeah,
Never been good at that
It's not a
game.
good day. I'm not interested in serving
I
my
think
country.
that is fantastic.
Yeah, it was really dumb. Yeah, so
Was it?
No, I don't think so. It turned
I
out
guess
okay.
it worked
I
out.
guess, yeah.
I think that's incredible.
It was so it did work out, but they did something I've never done, which is on Monday they called back and said, "Would you at least come and meet with us?" And I thought, I'm not a jerk. I'll go. It's 16 blocks away. I'll come talk to you, but I'm really not looking to leave my job. And I think the reason they called back is because they were talking to him about candidates, the vice president about candidates, and I think they saw where I had worked, and he called Dave Gribben. Dave told me this later and said, "What do you think about her?" And he said, "She would be fantastic, but you're never going to get her." And I think it would be. So I think that was a challenge.
I was
going to
say, that's a
can they get her
challenge.
to come back? Yeah. So I went down, and of course they talked me into it, and
So why did he think there's no way you would take the job?
because he knew I had stayed in he was really my first mentor, professional mentor, and very fatherly. And he knew I was doing well in my job, and I'm getting my grad degree. I'm going to have to drop out of that, which I did. And just, I don't think she's going to jump at this short term. Another job. I knew my first day there, if I made it the whole way through, my job ended at 11:59 p.m. on January 20th, 2009.
Yeah. Right.
Even if Republican wins, they're not going to want me in that job. So, I just think he thought she's not going to jump into that chaos.
But you did.
I sure did. With both feet.
Yeah. And boy, you had a lot to deal with during that time.
Yeah.
What was it like working for someone that the world sees one way and you see another?
That is an excellent way to put it. I think I've tried to articulate that before, but not as well as you just did in that question. For me, and I knew it when I interviewed with him, I had actually interacted with him twice before my interview that he doesn't know about or wouldn't remember. But the first one, I was an intern for Dan Coates. I accidentally hung up on him twice when he was Secretary of Defense. So he called. As I was an intern, I was filling in for his secretary, who left her desk once a year for a lunch with her colleagues in the Senate. Like, never left her desk. Lovely woman, Karen Parker, and she said, "You watched my phone. He's at a lunch, and he won't be back the whole time." And I said, "Sure." His lunch got canceled, and he came back, and he said, "I'm just going to be working in my office. Let me know if anybody calls." And I was, of course, so nervous because I'd rarely interacted with Senator Coates at that point. So anyway, Dick Cheney, that calls his secretary, says, "I've got the Secretary of Defense for Senator Coates." And I say, okay. So I put it on hold. Remember the old diamond that would go on the phone? So I went around the desk. I went and I said, "Senator, I've got Secretary Cheney is on the phone for you." And he said, "Great, transfer him in." So I went around and I promptly disconnected it somehow when I didn't transfer. And I was just sitting there and I was like, oh my God. And so 30 seconds, longest 30 seconds of my life go by. He comes to the doorway and he said, "Are you sending it in?" And I was like, it disconnected. And he's looks at me and then it rings again. And then now it's Dick Cheney. And he goes, "This is Secretary Cheney for the senator." And I looked at Senator Coates. I can see it like it's today. Looking at me, I'm sitting and I just went like this. And I just hung up the phone. And he looked at me and he was like, "What?" And I was like, "I don't know." I just panicked. I just hung up the phone. And so, yeah, and it immediately called back and he goes, "Just get up." So he took the call from my desk and then he went in his office. He was so nice about it. And Karen came back and said, "Did anything happen?" And I was like, "Yes, things happened and you will never leave your office again. And I'm never going to get a job here." Anyway, so that was my first interaction. The next time I was walking down the hall in the house with a friend goofing off on a Friday. And like we were going to get candy out of the candy machine. And Dave Gribben was walking the toward us. He was lobbying with Dick Cheney when they were at Halliburton. And there was like the way the light works, you can see someone's coming at you, but you can't tell who they are. It was a bright day. And right as they passed, Dave goes, "Mel." And I turned and I just saw him. And we used to do this all the time to each other. I go, "What's up?" Like that. And he looks at me mortified and I look over and Dick Cheney is standing by him. And I was like, oh my God, I am such an idiot. It's good to see you. And I was like, have a good day. So anyway, the third time I met him is when I interviewed and he hired me. And was fantastic. I loved working for him. He had his wife, Mrs. Cheney, is super, super smart. He'll tell you smarter than him. His daughters, both of whom I know, and one is a really good friend, are also just whip smart. He's very comfortable around, I think, smart, strong women. We had a lot of them. Mary Madeline had the job before me, and she's a powerhouse. And so I found him very easy to work for. He was clear in what he wanted. He was the best listener I've ever worked for. I would sit in on several of his different briefings, and I might explain something to him I know we've already talked about, and he might ask his head of legislative affairs something, or she may be briefing him. And in DC, the default is, I already know, you cut people off. He never cut anybody off, because she may tell something about this a little differently than me that may give him a different insight than I did. And I really learned how important that was. And he had been a staffer in the White House. So he knew at the same age I was, he was the White House chief of staff to President Ford. And so he, I think, maybe understood how panicked you could be in our situation. Or, I mean, you would always try to, I never made anything up with him. I didn't make up the year with him. I would tell him I didn't know, and I would go find it out, right? I didn't want him to lose confidence in me, but I certainly didn't know everything. But I found him to be, and he was a great teacher. I think he enjoyed working with young people and getting the best out of them. It was a great experience. And no one had a better sense of humor about themselves than he did, and especially at that point.
That surprises me.
Yeah.
He did not look like a guy who it is what you describe about laughing about himself.
Yeah. I've got a really great photo book that the photographer who's there is always taking pictures, and became a good friend of mine. We traveled a lot. And so you get to know these people really well. And he gave me this photo album. And when I show people, he's almost always smiling in the pictures. And they're like, that's not at all because the New York Times doesn't pick that picture
of course not.
Of Vice President Cheney, or they're picking a different one for a different narrative. And no, he was fantastic. Great sense of humor.
Wow.
Cool.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And new. I've never heard anybody say that.
I've never met anybody that's worked in the White House. I'm sitting here going, I've watched House of Cards. I know what it's like in there.
It's just like that.
Is
We
it?
were throwing people in front of the metro all the time.
Are you?
Yeah, constantly. Yeah. Anyone who crossed us, we just threw them in front of
And
a train.
everybody's so well dressed and so hot, and it's amazing.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
The banter is so constantly.
Witty
Really?
banter.
Yep. Yep. Just like the West Wing. Yeah.
So you've been in the Oval Office, right?
I
Is
have.
it intimidating?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
It has
is.
to be.
Although I was only in there a couple of times. I was in Vice President Cheney's office multiple times a week, which is down the hall from there. It's all intimidating. I used to tell people, like, the minute you come to work and it doesn't knock your socks off, and you aren't a little nervous, and you get in the motorcade or you get on Air Force 2 and you don't think, how the heck did this happen to me? You should leave.
Yeah.
Because it should always be amazing. And it was for me. And then also just the weirdest things happen to you.
Oh,
like
I bet.
You're in line for a Diet Coke and Bono walks up behind you because he obviously was really passionate about his Foundation One, and especially Africa and AIDS in Africa. And he was in the White House all the time. And
Wearing sunglasses?
yes, usually wearing sunglasses. Yes. And not that
Sun never
tall.
sets on the cool, you know that.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, that doesn't really happen in the field house when I'm waiting for a Diet Pepsi now. Bono is never standing behind me. So just
darn.
weird things like
Yet.
that happen all the
Yet.
time. Could be.
Yeah.
Listen, I would love to book you too. See if we can get them.
Is that your favorite band?
No.
Oh, who's your favorite
I
band?
like them. I really love, I don't have a ton of favorites, but I've seen Coldplay two or three times live, and I think they're a fantastic live performance.
You're going to
But
see them at the Sphere? They're going to be in Vegas at the Sphere.
are they going to do the
Yeah,
Sphere?
I think
I know
so.
they're going to be in Nashville this summer. I think I'm going to try to get down to Nashville to see them.
Cool.
Yeah, but I was at Taylor Swift like everybody else in town, and I thought she
wasn't.
was great. There's many that I like. The Eagles. We've had the Eagles. The Eagles are
Yes.
fantastic. Pink is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lady
many.
Gaga was fantastic years ago.
Yeah.
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 Well, now we've jumped from politics
Sorry.
to music. No, I
Yeah.
love it. That's what we do here.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break and come back with our second episode. But have we put a nice bow on the political part? Or after Dick Cheney, did you leave politics for good, or did you stick around for a while?
I went and worked on another convention, went back to the White House to wrap it up. And then
But wait, did you... Yeah. That was at the end after Cheney was...
So I was...
Not reelected.
Yeah, correct.
Right.
I, I went back and they didn't run again, obviously.
Right.
So I was back for like September of 2008 till the end in early 2009. And I think, so that's when I applied to move back home and work back in Indiana. But I did have a 2-year stint with Susan Brooks, Congresswoman Susan Brooks, in her freshman term. So I bounced back a little bit after I worked on the Super Bowl, but largely that chapter is over.
I want to ask you to go back. What is it like in that transition between administrations? And not the months. I mean the few days before to the day of the transition, because you hear lots of stories. But is it really as awkward and contentious and so on as it's portrayed at times?
Ours was not. I'm here to say, and that hasn't always been the case. I know that for my friends that came in 2001 off of Clinton, and I think the Gore v. Bush Supreme Court made that a little bit different. But that was a shorter time period. I think it was a little more stressful and a little bit more contentious. Although by today's standards, probably rather civil, but on
the contentious scale,
yeah. But I remember in 2008 on election night, I was with Vice President Cheney. He would take an annual trip around that time of year, and I was there for election night. So I placed the call to Vice President-elect Biden at the time for him to congratulate him, and they were off stage. Right before they went in Grant Park, right before they went on, I could hear the crowd on the phone. They spoke, and he was, Vice President Cheney was absolutely committed and had known Joe Biden for a long time. They had both been in D.C. a long time, and at a time when it wasn't as cantankerous as now. And he said, we are here to make sure that this goes smoothly for you, 100%, whatever you need. And that's how we followed that lead on both the president and the vice president side. So I thought it went pretty smoothly. And it wasn't chaotic. They had the full time period to do it. So I think we did it the right way. I think we took great pride in doing it that way.
That's fantastic. Would you have preferred to stay in politics?
No. When I left the White House, I was ready to find something new to do, and that's how I wound up here today.
So why were you ready for something new? Because I can imagine there has to be exhaustion.
Yeah, you're tired. It can be frustrating. Yeah, I mean, you do all the right things and you still lose. It's like dog years. A year in the White House it's 365 in a suit. We weren't a jeans kind of White House. You're in on a Sunday. It's a treadmill that doesn't stop. And I just thought I want to do something that has meaning to me. I wouldn't be good at selling widgets or something. That's never been what I would want to do. But I think there's something, I wanted to get closer to home, aging parents, that kind of thing. But also just the challenge of a business. When you're in the government, you get an amount of money on the first day of the fiscal year and you spend it down, and then you do it again next year. I wanted to add to the P&L on the revenue side of it and think about the challenges that could be. I was roughly 20 years into my career. I thought, I've got a lot more life in me. I'm going to be working till I'm probably of legal retirement age. And do I want to keep doing this I could do it for 20 more years. I want to kill someone by the end of it, probably. So let's try something different. And the beauty of it is I could always come back. I've got the skill set. If I want to go do something for 2 or 3 years and I realize I don't like that and maybe it reinforces what I'm good at, I'll just come back.
Would you ever run for an office?
I've been asked that before. I don't think that there's people who are behind people in office and people who want to put their name on a ballot. I probably don't want to put my name on a ballot.
That seems like a maybe.
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah.
You're surprising me because you would be excellent choice.
Yeah.
That's nice of you to say, but I'm not sure.
I think you have all the qualifications we need.
I think it's interesting that you say, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's a maybe. Just say maybe.
Yeah, probably a 70-30 against. Why don't we leave it at that?
We'll take 70-30.
All right.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'm in Marion County, so I'm not sure my natural party is going to align with getting elected to much of anything.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. That's our politalk.
That's about as political as we get on this show.
Yeah, that is about as political as we're going to get on this show. But it's so enlightening and so
incredibly interesting.
And now we're going to switch from that, and we're going to go to football and basketball, and we'll talk about that with our next part of our interview with Mel Raines. It'll be the second episode, and it'll come to you in just a few. Hope you join us.
And just a reminder, episodes are always posted on the 1st and 15th of every single month. You'll hear this one on the 15th.
You've been listening to Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shumaker and Kristi Lee. If you like what you hear, please give a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best compliment. Thanks to our producers, Chris Spangle of Leaders and Legends, LLC. You can reach him at leadersandlegends.net. Also, thanks to Sophie Ritz. I'm Christopher Geisen. Thanks for joining us.